Welcome, everyone. We're pleased to have you join us for our Sharing Ocean Acidification Resources for Communicators and Educators, or SOARCE webinar today. Our series is presented by the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program in collaboration with the National Marine Sanctuaries. Our goal is to provide ocean acidification communication tools to formal and informal educators and stakeholders and rights holders across the country to promote a more integrated and effective ocean acidification education community. I'm Liz Parati. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, and I'll be facilitating today's session along with Natalie Lord, who is our Capacity Building and Engagement Knaus Fellow with the Ocean Acidification Program. During the presentation, attendees will be in listen-only mode. We are recording this presentation and it will be available to you on our YouTube channel. The link we'll place in the chat, and any links that we use today and refer to today will be in the chat. You are welcome to type questions or comments into the questions control panel, and we'll monitor those incoming questions and respond to them or pose them to our speaker at the end of her presentation today. Before we start, we'd like to know a little about who's attending today's webinar. Please take a minute to complete the poll, which you should find on the menu screen under polls. We'll take one more minute here. All right, let's see. It looks like most of us have responded to the poll. Let's take a look at the results here. So it looks like our audience is educators and researchers today. Thank you for joining us. Anyone who registered for this or anyone who visits our YouTube site can access this presentation afterwards. So our presentation today is given by Miley Branson. She's the Science Director at the Chugach Regional Resources Commission and the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute. She'll be sharing insights from their community science water quality monitoring program with Alaska Natives and others across Southcentral Alaska. Miley holds a bachelor's degree in biology, master's in fisheries with an emphasis on aquaculture and fish health, and a doctorate in biology focusing on disease ecology and wildlife virology and toxicology. As Science Director at the tribally managed Chugach Regional Resources Commission and its Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute, Miley is passionate about studying One Health issues as they relate to Native people, animals, and the environment of the South Central regions of Alaska. Thank you, Miley, and with that, we'll start the presentation. Miley, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. Give me 1 second here to load this. Okay, welcome everybody. I apologize, I am beginning to lose my voice, so bear with me here. I'm here to talk to you today about community sampling for ocean acidification in South Central Alaska. And as Liz already mentioned, I am Miley Branson. I'm the Science Director with Chugach Regional Resources Commission and the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute. Okay, a little bit about Chugach Regional Resources Commission. We are a consortium of 7 tribes in South Central Alaska, and we cover the region between Lower Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound. So everything from about Homer, Port Graham and Nanwalek are our tribes near Homer, all the way over to the Eyak tribe in Cordova is our region. We were established to manage natural resources and engage in both terrestrial and marine science across the region on behalf of the tribes. And we own and operate the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute, and that is located in Seward, Alaska. So a little bit about our tribes. These are all coastal tribes in South Central Alaska, and most of them are fairly rural. Access is limited to vessel and aircraft. And so a lot of these villages heavily rely on subsistence lifestyles, and subsistence resources is a major portion of their diet. And you can see here we have the tribes, Port Graham, Valdez, Tutitlik, Chiniga, Seward, Nanwalek, Cordova, and the Eyak tribe. Okay, and this is the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute. It is located in Seward, the home of the Chugach tribe. In this left-hand photo, it is the building on the far lower left. It's that long building with the white roof. It's kind of a nondescript gray building from the outside, but a lot of exciting stuff happens inside. We are also located on the campus next to the University of Alaska Fairbanks Seward Marine Center, which is the next building over, and the Alaska Sea Life Center, which is the building after that. So we are in a little marine campus here in downtown Seward. And this is the inside of the Institute here. We conduct a lot of marine research, and a lot of our research focuses on invertebrates, which I'll talk about in a moment. We have 2 laboratory spaces. This is our biology laboratory space, and this is our ocean chemistry laboratory space, which I will again talk about in a little bit here. So I'd like to jump back and talk about the people of the Chugach region. These are a few of our board members. We have 7 board members and an alternate, and these board members represent each of the 7 tribes, and typically they are chiefs or leaders of those tribes. And we meet on a quarterly basis, and all of our research and monitoring efforts are conducted at the directive of the tribe. So essentially, we will meet and we'll have these intensive discussions. In addition to management discussions, we'll discuss scientific needs. The tribes will come to us with things that they've observed in their lands and their waters, things that they're concerned about, things that are changing that they're worried about, and potential health threats and subsistence availability threats. So on the right-hand side, this is kind of what one of those sessions looks like. We'll sit around and discuss things that they've observed, and the second photo down is a word map of what that looks like. So this kind of depicts one of those discussions where we're talking about availability of intertidal resources and their concern for preserving the subsistence lifestyle. And after we have that discussion, we will kind of formulate this integrative approach that kind of incorporates the 2-eyed seeing, or the co-production of knowledge methods. So we'll kind of integrate what they've observed, we'll tell them what we've observed and what we're aware of, and then we will come up with an action plan and a research plan based on those discussions. So again, subsistence is crucially important to the people of the region. We have a saying in the region, when the tide is out, the table is set, and that is an ages-old Alutiiq phrase that is commonly used in the region. And this photo just depicts just a few of the animals that are available and heavily subsisted upon by the people of the region to this day. So I'd like to hone it in a little bit and talk about shellfish as a traditional food source. A significant portion of the Alutiiq people diet is shellfish-based and intertidal species-based. Oops. And we've got some photos here of some of our tribe members collecting shellfish and doing shellfish research with us out in the field. And so we formulated our intertidal species program to incorporate both restoration for subsistence uses and research. And so we typically structure these programs, and we've kind of replicated these across a number of different species. We will collect these animals as adults, we'll bring them back to the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute, and we will spawn them. We'll research spawning methods, and we'll raise them, and of course we'll research rearing methods as well. And then once they are well into the juvenile phase, we will outplant them back to the communities to enhance subsistence resources. And we'll also do research on the outplanting growth and success rates. So these are just a few of the species we cover. It is by no means all of them, but we've worked on everything from crab to native clams. We do oysters, we do chitons, and we do a number of other smaller intertidal species. We do a bunch of mollusks, sea cucumbers. And so in our investigations and through this kind of subsistence enhancement program, we realized that a lot of these species were not faring well regardless of our enhancement efforts. And that led us to kind of go down this exploratory path that we discussed with our tribal members, which kind of we formulated into this very generalized hypothesis. Is ocean acidification affecting the intertidal species in South Central Alaska? And it's something that we had initially brought to the tribes that may be a topic of concern. And once we kind of discussed what was available in the literature and what we knew about the situation, our tribe members felt that it was a very concerning topic and something that we should investigate more. And thus the Chugach Regional Ocean Monitoring Program was born. So this is our big monitoring program. And it's heavily based on community sampling. So I'll talk a little bit more about the structure here. So the way that this program works is in each of our 7 communities, we have one community member who works with us as a field sampler. And this person collects samples on a weekly basis. This person is funded through the EPA's Indian General Assistance Program. And that program funds a person in each tribal community to do general environmental work. This has been a challenge for us in the past, specifically during the pandemic, because this person's position basically includes everything from like waste management, public health management, down to environmental health. So they cover a broad range of things, and sometimes our ocean sampling program does kind of fall by the wayside in times of specific need, such as the pandemic. So this person on a weekly basis will wander down to a dockside location or other seaside location, and they will collect everything that you see in the green boxes here. So they'll do a phytoplankton tow, they'll take a seawater chemistry sample, and during the summer months and 6 months throughout the summer, they will collect a shellfish sample, which is blue mussels only, and they will also collect relevant environmental data such as weather, ocean conditions, tidal conditions, and things like that. In a lot of the communities also, we've collaborated with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium to fund purple air monitors, which are these really nifty little monitors that as long as they're hooked up to Wi-Fi, they collect continuous data and it feeds into all of the major weather data sources, which is really exciting. And it allows for a really complete weather monitoring effort, complete and continuous, which is wonderful. So in the gray here, you have all of the analyses that we conduct at our laboratory. So they will take this phytoplankton tow sample, bottle it up, and send it back to us. And in our laboratory, we have a technician who will do microscopic identification of harmful algal species at Alutiiq Pride. This one in the purple, we are working on developing. We're looking at adapting quantitative PCR for molecular species identification for harmful algae species. So that's still in development. The seawater chemistry samples, which is obviously what we're concerned about today. So we do a whole suite of seawater carbonate chemistry readings, which I will talk about in a moment. We also do nutrient analyses. So we look at total nitrogen, all three nitrogens, nitrate, nitrite, and ammonia, and phosphorus. And for the biotoxin analysis, we'll use an ELISA or a receptor binding assay method to evaluate the presence of saxitoxins and domoic acid. And so this is a little bit, this is sort of like the workflow. So this person will collect all these samples, bottle them up, and they'll typically send them to us as fast as they can. In some cases, it only occurs on a monthly basis, but in some cases, they do actually send us the samples on a weekly basis, which is really exciting. And we can turn around data fairly quickly for those folks. So they'll package them up, put them on the plane. I will say one of our largest hurdles is the transportation hurdle because they are rural. They only have access via plane or boat. And so that can be challenging to get everything shipped out in a timely fashion because obviously there are some other things that take precedence and priority. Okay, so the samples will come to us and we will evaluate them as we discussed before for both harmful algal blooms and ocean chemistry. So these are a few of our tribal samplers in our communities. This is Hope Roberts, the Valdez Native Tribe, Naomi McMullen with the Port Graham Village Tribe, Stephen Payton in the Seldovia Village Tribe, although Seldovia is not included in our 7 tribes. They participate in our sampling program as well. They are just really excited to learn more about what's going on in their waters. And so they felt that this was a high priority, so they decided to join our monitoring program in addition to our tribes. And this is also Ivy Patton with the Native Village of Eyak. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our analytical methods. And please forgive me, researchers out there, I do not have an oceanography or ocean chemistry background. And so I will try my best to answer any questions that you might have. So we use a Berkelator. It is a piece of equipment developed by Dr. Burke Hales at Oregon State University. It's capable of high resolution ocean chemistry measurements, and it takes TCO2, PCO2, total alkalinity, salinity, pH, carbonate and bicarbonate ions, and it will also calculate aragonite and calcite saturations, or saturation states. And it can be used for both continuous monitoring and discrete samples from offsite locations. So in its normal day-to-day, it does continuous monitoring of our seawater at the facility. And when we receive samples, we take it off of that offline from the continuous monitoring, and we will process those discrete samples as they come in. So this is a little bit about what the sample kits look like. So we've actually found that beer bottles are one of the most effective, cost-effective and simple methods for sample collection. We send the beer bottles out as long as they're packaged really carefully, and we don't let them freeze, which is a major point that I try to make to some folks in the wintertime. We'll send them out to the communities with a little capper. They collect those data, or they collect the environmental data. They'll take that water sample. They will preserve it with mercuric chloride, and they will take an ambient seawater sea surface temperature, cap the bottle, and with the mercuric chloride as a preservative, these are shelf stable for up to a year. And as long as we have the sea surface temperature at time of collection, we can back calculate all other parameters. So it's very simple on the sampling end. And this is Jacqueline Ramsey. She heads up our Ocean Acidification Research Laboratory, and she is conducting a discrete sample analysis in this photo. Okay, so these are some of the data. I just picked one of our villages. This is the native village of Eyak, and 2019 to 2021. These are some of the parameters that we've observed. And these are the aragonite saturation states over time as well. This line at 1, below 1 is the threshold at which aragonite saturation states tend to begin to affect the growth and development of shellfish. So as you can see, we're dipping below 1 at a couple points throughout this time period. And this is particularly concerning for the health of shellfish and other intertidal species in the region. So our sampling program has been hugely successful within our region, and it has been so successful that we have begun to work with other tribes outside of our region. Like I said, we've incorporated Seldovia, and we have also expanded to Utqiagvik, Kotzebue, Nome, Unalaska, Kodiak, and we also conduct discrete analysis for research cruises that go throughout the Gulf of Alaska and collect various other data, and we've provided supplemental analyses for them. And since we started in 2012, we are the longest running sampling and ocean acidification monitoring program in Alaska, which is really exciting for us. And so our hope is that we can continue to expand and build out this program to include sampling sites across Alaska. So through these efforts, we were actually fortunate enough to be able to publish some of these in collaboration with a couple of other researchers, namely Dr. Wiley Evans at the Chugach Institute. This is just one of the figures from those published data. And I believe that this is for Seldovia. These are some other parameters also from that paper. So I'd like to say a word about research and development. So through this monitoring program, again, we realized that this was a major issue. And so we kind of began to build out our research programs as well. And that includes both conducting internal research and hosting external researchers to do work at the facility. So this is Marina Washburn. She's now Dr. Marina Washburn. And in these containers are juvenile pink salmon. And they are being exposed to various atmospheric PCO2, TCO2 conditions. And she is looking at the effects on behavior, growth, and development on juvenile pink salmon. We're also doing some research and development with Dr. Burke Hales and the Ocean Foundation, and we're working on this device called the PCO2Go. We've been doing most of the beta testing for it at the facility, and it is meant to be a handheld version of the Burkolator. It's a small PCO2 meter that you can take anywhere, and the goal is that eventually that this can be incorporated for use with the tribe members, and they can take those measurements on site and thus reduce a huge amount of workload while still collecting quality data. And this is our director, Jeff Hetrick, and Dr. Burke Hales in the field and in the hatchery, testing out some of the components. And this is PCO2Go version 1. So we had some really exciting beta tests happening. This was last year. And we're working on refining. We're on, I think, maybe version 2 or 3 now. Okay, so I'd like to bring it back and talk about the knowledge sharing and data dissemination piece. So information sharing, we share information kind of with 3 major cohorts. We share information primarily with the tribes, and we do this through monthly sampler meetings. So we also have an EPA IGAP funded environmental coordinator that works for Chugach Regional Resources Commission, and this person is responsible for interpreting these data back to the public and to the tribes. And so she holds monthly sampler meetings where specifically with the samplers, they want to see the results of their work. And so we will take all of the data that we've analyzed, and on a monthly basis, everyone will log on and she'll show us what we found in each of the communities, which is really exciting. And I think it really gives them, it really gives purpose to what they're doing. And what we're really trying to steer clear from is the traditional Western science that you parachute in, you take all the data, and you do all the sample collections, and people help you, and you get them excited about it, and then you disappear and never come back. And that's something that we're really trying to avoid. So we try to keep up to date on that on a monthly basis. We also do Facebook updates, and these are fairly sporadic, but if we see something new and exciting that we're really thrilled about, we will share it on our Facebook. Facebook is a major form of communication in a lot of these villages, and a lot of them just have like one village Facebook page, so it's fairly simple to just post these updates to those Facebook pages. We also do quarterly digital newsletters, and so we have a mailing list, and these newsletters go out with everything that we've observed in the environment is included in that newsletter, along with a bunch of other stuff. We'll also send out emergency alerts this way. So specifically for harmful algal blooms, if we're observing high levels of algal toxins in shellfish or plankton, phytoplankton in the water, this is something that we would send an emergency alert out for. We also do a variety of multimedia products. We're going to show you one here in a moment. And I would say that probably our most beneficial format. So on an annual basis, we send our environmental coordinator and our education and outreach coordinator to each village. They kind of make their rounds, and they go to each village, and we'll spend a couple days there. We'll bring food, we'll bring treats, we'll bring toys for the kids, and we'll host these really informal sit-down discussions. We'll do a town hall style on some of the more formal ones, but most of them tend to look more like a potluck style gathering. We basically just host a big party in the village. We'll cook a bunch of spaghetti or lasagna, or bring some some various like potluck food, potato salad, things like that. And we'll just have this like really informal, friendly sit down gathering. And we can just have really open discussions about what we've been seeing, what they've been seeing. And we find that to be the most beneficial method for knowledge sharing in both directions. So that's been a hugely beneficial way that we've discovered to do these sorts of exchanges. So with the public, again, multimedia products, Facebook updates, and classic presentations. We do a lot of those throughout the community. In some of the bigger communities, we'll just do like a public community presentation. And of course, within the scientific community, we do conferences, presentations, posters, publications. And I think maybe this is an appropriate time to share one of our multimedia products specifically funded by NOAA. So we were able to create this video that talks a little bit about ocean acidification in our region and tells the story of tribal ocean acidification monitoring. So I think if we can watch that now, let's hope that, there we go.
Right.
Well, I'll let it load for just a moment.
In a changing ocean environment, and ocean acidification is one of the changes that we're seeing take place around Alaska's waters.
My people have lived along the Copper River Delta for the last 3,500 years. EACs, historically, wherever they went, it was about subsistence and their food. So where they set up camp is why they named us EAC, the Throat of the Lake people. We, as children, would grow up subsistence fishing, gathering. All of us learned how to dig clams. We would shrimp fish. We would catch king crab. We would have some of the best seafoods on the planet every single day for our meal. Things are changing drastically. We, as Indigenous peoples, let alone any human in Alaska that lives here because they love this way of life, need to get out of this denial about climate change and ocean acidification. If you can't feed your people traditional food from the land and the sea, then you're going to cease to exist.
Ocean acidification is basically a carbon dioxide problem. It comes from the same root cause as climate change, where we're putting carbon emissions into the atmosphere through activities that we do every day. We drive our cars, we fly on airplanes, we generate electricity. Most of that carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere, but about a third of it gets absorbed by the ocean, and it changes the chemistry of the seawater and makes it become more acidic. Alaska is more susceptible to ocean acidification than other parts of the world, primarily because our water is cold, and cold water can absorb more gas. And so this puts us naturally at a closer threshold to where species might have trouble.
So why does ocean acidification matter? Well, in the open ocean, it might be a problem that we don't need to worry about for decades, if not a century. The open ocean is basic, the changes are slow. In the coastal oceans, it's a different story. What we're finding is that in these coastal waters, which are often cold, which are often fresh, which are often impacted by local respiratory processes that increase the CO2 for natural reasons, because of this additional CO2 from anthropogenic sources, we're crossing thresholds and moving into harmful conditions. The species that are most affected by ocean acidification are species that make shells or structures out of calcium carbonate, particularly at early larval stages. Crabs in their very early larval stages have a significant amount of calcium carbonate in their skeletal structure. We know from experimental work on Dungeness crabs that they're sensitive in that stage to ocean acidification because of their need to form calcium carbonate. There are organisms that you may not be as familiar with called pteropods. Pteropods are zooplankton. They're a critically important piece of the diet of Pacific salmon in their first years at sea. We're very worried about cultured species, clams, mussels, oysters, and the very early developmental stages. Those organisms are planktonic, and they have to build their shell as the most critical first step in their development. They've already shown significant impacts, and aquaculturists have to take significant steps to mitigate the conditions in the water before they do their aquaculture activities.
The most important thing that you need at a shellfish hatchery is good water quality. And typically you look at things like dissolved oxygen and temperature and sediment load. But here we also add the factor of what the carbon chemistry is like, because we've learned how important that is for the success and survival of juvenile shellfish. We constantly monitor the incoming water at the resurrection bay, and so we can observe daily what the carbon chemistry is. We utilize the percolator, and it's a device that gives you climate data, which is what you really need to hone in on the accuracy of what your carbon chemistry is doing. So when we first started realizing that we had some measurements in Resurrection Bay that were levels of concern, we wanted to know if that was just in Resurrection Bay or region-wide.
In response to ocean acidification, a number of folks have suggested the idea of citizen science as a way to increase the breadth of our measurements. So what we've done is we've developed a citizen sampling program where folks from all over coastal Alaska, including remote tribal villages, are able to easily and inexpensively collect samples that can be preserved and delivered back to a laboratory like that at Alutiiq Pride, where an instrument such as the percolator can do the detailed, high-resolution, high-accuracy measurements of those samples.
The real work, citizen science and community monitoring for ocean acidification is being led by the tribes in Alaska, which is really exciting and also providing an example for the rest of the country.
The Chugach Regional Resources Commission oversees 7 tribal communities in Southcentral Alaska. There's Eyak, Acidification, Valdez, and Janiga in the Prince William Sound, Chugach here in Seward, Nanwalek and Fort Graham are in Lower Cook Inlet. And these are tribal communities. They all have environmental coordinators. And essentially what they do is every week they go out and they use a yellow spring instruments and measure the salinity and temperature and collect a sample for us. And after they collect a couple dozen samples, they'll mail them in to us. We'll process them here as discrete samples at APMI. We view the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute as sort of the vector between the climate scientists that look at carbon chemistry and the people who live on the ground and witness these things. And so by collecting and processing these samples, our data goes 2 places. It goes back to the communities and the people that live in these villages, or whether it's ocean chemists around the world that have access to our data.
We know that certain times of year, waters around Alaska are already passing a threshold of acidity that could be harmful to certain species. Fall and winter tend to be the most corrosive time of year due to a number of natural factors, including phytoplankton, which in the summertime, big phytoplankton blooms happen in a lot of Alaska's coastal waters, including the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska, and they're sucking up carbon dioxide out of the surface water, which actually makes the acidity go down during that time. But then they die and they fall through the water column, and it's basically pumping that carbon down to the bottom water. When that deep, corrosive, colder water is moved up to the surface, then you can have what's known as sometimes ocean acidification events.
We're learning so much about the local conditions that we would never have been able to determine from just looking at the open Gulf of Alaska, the open ocean, the global picture. What we're able to see by making these measurements is that the different locations are all distinct. There's no one simple story for the coastal Alaskan waters. Sitka is different than Seward, is different than Ketchikan, is different than Kodiak, and you couldn't know that without a detailed sampling program and monitoring instrumentation to assist with that.
We think of ocean acidification monitoring as putting headlights on a car. We want to see what's coming down the road. What are we approaching as far as changes in ocean conditions? And the more we can see out in front of us, the more we as Alaskans can adapt and make sure that our communities are resilient and our industries are resilient.
We've had more elders say that this project is something that's important to them because they want their grandchildren to be able to go out and harvest clams. We really want to make this sustainable and continue into the future so those younger generations have something to come back to and harvest.
Okay, so yeah, again, that was one of the videos and one of the multimedia products that we put out for the public, just to educate them about the what's happening in the region and about our monitoring program, which is really exciting. So I'd just like to end this talk with a little bit of highlights on communication lessons learned. I want to say first and foremost, building lasting community relationships is challenging and it's time consuming. We have one full-time staff member and that is all that she does. She spends a lot of time talking to people. She spends a lot of time visiting communities. And sometimes these relationships take years to develop. And some of the communities, in addition, are not as receptive to this. Most of them are, and most of them are really excited about the work that we're doing. But we have a select few that have told us like, hey, we're not super interested in this. And so I also think that it's really important to be respectful of community boundaries. We have a lot of folks approach us who want to do work in some of these communities and want to engage with the tribal samplers. And I think it's also really important to be cognizant of the workloads that we're asking them to do. Specifically with the IGAP funded folks, you know, they only have so many hours in the day as part of their regular job. And so if we continue to ask them to do more things, I think they are less and less likely to be inclined to jump on board. So I think those are some things to just think about. We've also had great success engaging youth. And in fact, I want to say about half of our tribal samplers right now are Indigenous youth, which is really, really exciting. We've also been able to work with the school system. And we've gotten a lot of these kids high school credit for this, and some of them are receiving college credit for it as well. And so that's been something, an avenue I think that's been really exciting. When you talk to a lot of elders in the village, I think one of their major concerns and one of the reasons that some of them are a little bit wary of programs like this is what they've seen throughout the years is, you know, we come and we kind of recruit their best and brightest and we take them away. We say that we're going to educate them and they leave and they never come back. And so that's something that we're really trying to avoid and something that we're trying to engage youth in stewardship in their hometown, in their region, and help them build careers that would support something like that. So I think that is a really, really important piece. And again, informal is always better. We have steered clear from any formal presentations. We don't make PowerPoints. We don't do anything like that. We find that an informal conversation is the best way to communicate in a lot of these settings. And I think the takeaway message here that I want to leave everyone with is knowledge exchange is a two-way street. You know, I think there's been a big push to incorporate co-production of knowledge, but it really is. Sometimes I go out there and we learn so much from the people that are out there, and I think they learn so much from us. And so I think that it's really important to have those conversations with an open mind and understanding that these people have been watching the coastal landscape and watching the waters for, you know, years and years and years and years. And in a lot of cases, some of them have much more information than we do. So I think that that's a really important message to incorporate. And I will leave you with that. Again, I'm Miley. My contact information is here. If anyone has any questions or wants to reach out to me, and you can check out all of our efforts and all of our data are updated in real time online at our website, alutiiqprideak.org. Oops. And that is it. Thank you so much. I suppose I'll take questions now.
Hey, Liz, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Miley, for presenting. If you have any questions or comments or responses that you have to anything that Miley presented, please feel free to put that into the questions box. I see that we have a couple. One thing I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned that you know, there are some challenges with transportation and other challenges because these are rural communities, and this really is a model where other people can kind of adapt this type of approach to other places. Would you have any specific recommendations or things to consider when addressing maybe adapting this to other rural communities?
I would say, especially when you're writing these funding requests, which is, you know, an error that I made when I first came on board. I was like, great, we'll just design this whole program and we'll get samples in and they'll come in on a weekly basis. And in reality, that is just not the case. I think expecting delays and building those into your at least specifically for the funders for your grant objectives, I think that is crucially important. To build in those delays and to not expect to be able to get those samples in a timely fashion always. In some cases they do arrive in a timely fashion, but you know, sometimes in some of the communities we go months without receiving them just because, you know, there are other things like mail and medicine that, you know, are obviously more important than our sampling program. So I think just building that in, and I think that's been a major challenge is the gap between what funders want and what we can actually provide, and understanding that, you know, even though things might be a little clunky at the beginning, it's really important to build these programs, and that's the way that they start. You know, they don't start at full efficiency, you know, and, you know, I think when a funder is looking at a piece of paper and they're like, did you get these on these days? And it's like, well, no, but we got them and people are really excited and we have this sampling program and we are collecting data. So I think that's maybe also a major gap that needs to be addressed at a higher level is, you know, especially with these Indigenous monitoring programs, is just kind of building in that space and that time, because people just don't operate like that in those communities. So, yeah.
Thanks for that perspective, and kind of reminding us that these processes take time to not only build up, but also to, you know, just overall function. That's a little bit related to a question we have from our audience in terms of timeliness and response for community. And you talked a lot about information sharing, getting that information back to these communities. The question is, in the case of harmful algal bloom detection, what is the time of response to these communities? Are you able to link any of that information, or is it more we have the information and we can look back and help inform how we might prepare for the future?
Yeah, I would say, and again, that was, you know, our original goal was like, oh yeah, we'll receive them and, you know, we'll have a 24-hour turnaround time. And when we receive samples, we have a, for the microscopy, you know, we can look at them within an hour of their arrival time and get those data online and get them back to folks. But yeah, that's been a major challenge for us. And I really think, again, I think it works into my previous answer is, I think when you're thinking about what the objective is for these, it would probably be more useful as a monitoring, you know, maybe a modeling, forecasting, hindcasting kind of effort rather than a community health and safety effort, which it is, but it's not always perfect. So yeah, that's a major challenge for sure.
Great, thank you for that. Now you mentioned that, you know, the best way to communicate with these types of communities is through kind of this informal dialogue. And have any of the participating Native Alaskan communities been wanting certain types of information in certain forms? Is it just through these communications? Is it through Facebook? What other kinds of education or communication needs have you heard from the communities over this large spatial area?
A lot of them have expressed interest in actually looking at figures. So I was pretty surprised by that because, you know, it works great in that informal conversational setting. And then some of them will be like, oh, can you show me? And at that point, you know, we whip out the figures because I have them, but, and then I'll just bring up my laptop and I'll be like, yeah, check this out. Isn't this cool? And I still think in that setting, it's less intimidating than like a PowerPoint. And you're like, well, here, don't you understand that PCO2 is, you know, fluctuating on a cyclical basis or whatever. And so, yeah, I think, so I bring that information. But yeah, I try not to whip it out right off the bat because a lot of people are intimidated by it for sure.
And is this different? You mentioned the kind of 3 cohorts or 3 audiences you were really reaching out to. Does that differ from these other groups? I know that you've been communicating mainly with the tribes that are participating and now these other groups that are kind of being recruited to this process because of their interest. But in terms of the public or other communities the group serves, have they wanted sort of a different approach?
I would say that the information requested by the tribes and the public is generally the same. Sometimes the tribe members want to know more specific things about specific, like I said, like they are super knowledgeable about the region. And so, you know, sometimes they'll say things that completely catch me off guard and I don't know the answer to, you know, they're like, oh, you know, tidewater glacial outflow. And they'll start talking about things like that. And, you know, occasionally I'm totally stumped and I'm like, well, let me get back to you. So in terms of specific content requested, no, but I would just, you know, in your interactions with the tribes, know your region because they know their region. And when they ask you, you better hopefully have an answer, or if not, you know, have a way to find the answer. So I think that it differs in that way. The general public is just kind of like, oh, that was great, that was feel good, and on to the next thing. You know, occasionally you'll have, you know, someone with a PhD in the audience who has a specific question, but yeah, I would say in general, tribes are very familiar with the region and they've been there for a long time and they'll share generational knowledge about changes they've observed. And so having that regional knowledge is crucially important.
Great. And then again, a reminder to our audience, if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to put them into the questions box. But before we wrap up, just thinking about people who might consider or are in the process of developing a similar community sampling program. You kind of mentioned certain types of capacity that you guys utilize or needs. You mentioned a dedicated person that just goes out and works with the communities. You mentioned the percolator, but then having to take that offline to kind of process these samples. Can you talk a little bit more that, like, in the ideal world, what would, you know, one, what kind of capacity did you need to get going? And two, in an ideal world, if you wanted to kind of improve the process, what types of things would you need to kind of enhance that capacity?
So question one, I think building that community support and kind of like, you know, starting to generate that momentum in the communities is the most important part. So when we're building these programs, we start small, and you know, with these sampling programs, no matter what they're sampling for, even if you start with a contractual lab, so we do a lot of, you know, contractual processing for other communities. But even if you just start that sample collection process, because that takes so long, I think that would be the piece that I would build first, is engaging those communities and just kind of starting to get them excited. You go out and you have those conversations, and, you know, hey, if you're interested, we'll process, we can look at that for you for free. And then you know, you can get your funding and collect those samples. And even if you don't have the laboratory capacity, you can send them away, and you can still deliver those results. And so, you know, oftentimes they're not seeing what's happening on the back end, and you're still accomplishing the same piece. And then you can start to build that internal laboratory capacity. And so, yeah, I think that is definitely the way that I would start it. I wouldn't go full bore and buy all the equipment, not having the samplers and not having those relationships built, because I think you'll probably just end up with a really expensive piece of equipment that sits there. And employing a chemist, which is also expensive. So, so yeah, that's definitely the way I would start that. And the Indian General Assistance Program has been great for that. It's a model that a lot of the communities use to kind of generate that momentum. So it's something that a lot of people are doing. In terms of question two, we're actually about to buy a second percolator so that we can, because we have so many discrete samples coming in now, we're ending up having to just take ours offline all of the time. And so we have one for continuous monitoring, and then we'll have one for discrete sample processing. And I think in terms of capacity, that would be it. And I've had a lot of discussions with Burke about this, but incorporating higher throughput We haven't quite figured out a way to do that, but yeah, higher sample throughput, I think, is definitely a need for us. So, yeah.
Thank you for all the insights and for sharing this project and that video product. I will remind the audience that all the links you can either find by the recording, and we've also put them into the chat so that you can access and share them. With that, I'll turn it over to Natalie, and I want to thank again Miley Branson for her presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miley, for your insightful presentation and advice for community engagement. It was great. Thank you all to all of our attendees for joining us today. We welcome any feedback, any further questions or suggestions for topics for this webinar. Also, if you know of anyone who might be a good fit for a presenter, we are always taking suggestions. You can email us on the 2 emails, so the NOAA Ocean Acidification email or Liz's email that are on the screen. Our next webinar will be on July 12th, also a Wednesday at 1 p.m. And we will be hearing from Adriana Reza, who will be sharing her insights from their ocean acidification teacher training workshop that happened in Texas. So thank you all again, and this concludes the webinar.